What a week it's been. Since being sworn in on Tuesday, the speed at which the Republican Party has broken their promises has been dizzying. Speaking of the Republicans' first days in office, Tea Party spokesman Mark Meckler summed the week up nicely when he said, I quote, actually don't think it would be possible to fall from grace any faster than this, end quote. In November, the Republican leadership, led by Speaker Boehner, traveled to suburban Virginia and made a pledge to America. Their constituents, including Tea Party patriots like Mr. Meckler, listened intently as the Republican Party pledged to be fiscally responsible and serve the will of the American people. On page 6 of the Republicans' Pledge to America, the party states, and I quote, with common sense exceptions for seniors, veterans, and our troops, we will roll back government spending to pre-stimulus, pre-bailout levels, saving us at least $100 billion in the first year alone and putting us on a path to balance the budget and pay down the debt, end quote. The pledge was solemnly made by Republican leadership despite being largely panned as a political stunt. Despite their promise to follow through on their pledge, on Tuesday, aides to the Republican majority said that the pledge to cut $100 billion was hypothetical. Today, now, we're moving forward to do the exact opposite of the actions that they pledged as they introduce legislation to repeal the Affordable Care Act. If successful, the Republican legislation will add $230 billion to the deficit by 2021. This extra $230 billion won't be spent rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, teaching our children, or providing for the millions without jobs. Instead, the $230 billion will be added to our deficit in order to take health care benefits and protections from those who need them the most. For example, starting this year, the Affordable Health Care Act will begin to close the donut hole for seniors. Under the law, Medicare beneficiaries who fall in the donut hole will be eligible for a 50% discount on covered brand-name prescription drugs. Repeal this law and seniors receive no help and will be forced to pay their rising drug costs alone. Those are the types of protections that I fight for today. Fiscally, members of Congress face a $300 billion choice. According to the Congressional Budget Office, we have two options. One, do we keep the Affordable Health Care Act and save $130 billion by 2021? Or two, do we repeal the Affordable Health Care Act and add $230 billion to our deficit by 2021? That may be trouble for some, but for most of us it's easy. For me, the answer is clear, and I assume to most Americans it's clear as well. Because they can't win by simply judging apples to apples, the Republican leadership has taken to discrediting the Congressional Budget Office. Yet a quick bit of research will reveal that Republicans have long valued the nonpartisan and reliable work of the Congressional Budget Office and have publicly supported the agency before. In fact, 2009, Speaker Boehner repeatedly referred to the CBO as nonpartisan institution and relied on their estimates to argue against the Affordable Care Act at the time. But now that the CBO's estimates are detrimental to their political goals, they have taken to questioning the work. Republican Senator John Cornyn warned against dismissing the work of the CBO just because it's inconvenient. 2 years ago, he said, I quote, I believe the professionals at the CBO are doing a difficult but unpopular work. They are speaking the truth to power here in Washington and making the folks who would pass these enormous unfunded bills that impose this huge debt on generations hereafter somewhat unhappy. But I think they're doing important service by telling us the facts. And last week, I commended the director of the CBO, Dr. Doug Elmendorf, for saying that the CBO will never adjust to make people happy. Thank you, Dr. Elmendorf. God bless him for his integrity and commitment to telling the truth, because we have to learn how to deal with the truth, not try to remake it or to cover it up. Now, I couldn't agree more with that. The deficit estimates provided by the CBO are the singular authoritative figures upon which we make all of our decisions and have for decades. Even if some don't like what the numbers tell us, we know that numbers don't lie. I remind my colleagues that today's actions are not, quote, hypothetical, unquote. We truly face a $300 billion choice. We can choose to provide invaluable benefits to millions of Americans while paying down our national deficit. Remember that it will save $143 billion over 10 years. Or we can choose invaluable health care protections for millions and add $230 billion to the nation's deficit. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, today we are considering the first measure from the Rules Committee of this new Congress, and my Republican friends have already produced one for the record books. Let me give you some of the highlights. First of all, the resolution includes a completely closed process for two separate pieces of legislation. That means we get two closed rules in one. And maybe my Republican friends think they could save taxpayers money by rolling all the closed rules into a single resolution. I think that's what they meant by bringing efficiency to government. The first closed rule on the health care bill does most of the heavy lifting, blocks every single germane amendment submitted to the Rules Committee. That's not exactly right, no. It actually slips in one change without allowing the House to vote on it. The special amendment slipped in with the famous demon pass maneuver is very interesting. It allows the House to pretend that the repeal bill is free, even though the Budget Office says it will raise the deficit by over $1 trillion. That's a neat trick. And now we know the secret weapon for reducing the deficit, a blindfold. This closed process is especially troubling on the health care repeal, because this Republican bill has had no public hearings, no committee consideration, and is not paid for. The second closed rule in its 2-for-1 package blocks all amendments to another resolution to correct a flaw in the swearing-in process. Apparently, the Vice Chairman of the Rules Committee was conducting legislative business before he was actually a member of Congress. Maybe amendments are not important here because no member in the House has seen this resolution, since the rule allows the majority leader to make the changes until the moment it is introduced. But if any of my colleagues are concerned about not having enough time to read this surprise resolution, don't worry. The rule allows the House to debate it for 4 full minutes. 4 minutes. Have you ever heard of a bill debated for 4 minutes? Fortunately, the rule generously gives the minority 2 of those 4 minutes, and I guess that qualifies as both efficiency and bipartisanship. Finally, the rule allows the House to consider a sweeping press release from the Republican leadership, a resolution to replace real patient protections with vague rhetoric. And Mr. Speaker, this is a very disappointing day for the House Rules Committee. Our first action of the new Congress violates the promises that we heard from our Republican friends. No public hearings, no committee consideration, a completely closed process, legislative text no member has read, 4 minutes of debate on an important constitutional issue, and so on. For all those members who were sent to Washington like I was to repair our nation's finances, create jobs for millions of the unemployed, help the millions of Americans in need, the decision should be simple. I encourage my colleagues to reject the efforts of the Republican leadership, keep our promises to our constituents, and vote to keep the Affordable Health Care law. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from California.